good evening, and welcome back. Welcome to the quiet moments that lie between the world of light and the world of dreams. The noise of the day has finally softened into a distant murmur, and the weight of your thoughts can now be gently set aside. Take a slow, deep breath and feel the stillness of the night air as it fills you. And as you exhale, imagine you're releasing a single, heavy stone into a deep, calm pool of water. Watch the ripples spread and then fade into perfect stillness. With each breath, let another stone, another worry, another thought sink away until the surface of your mind is clear and tranquil, reflecting only the quiet darkness around you. There is nothing required of you here. No effort, no action. Simply allow yourself to rest, to float, and to listen as we journey once more into the heart of an ancient story. Tonight, we explore a force as old as the cosmos itself, a power that can build kingdoms and burn them to the ground. We are not speaking of the thunder of a king or the strategy of a warrior goddess. We are speaking of a power that is far quieter, far more subtle, and in many ways, far more dangerous. We are speaking of beauty. Think of it for a moment. Is it a simple harmony of form and color that pleases the eye? Is it a fleeting moment of grace, like the sight of a deer in a sunlit glade? Or can it be something more? Can beauty be a power in itself? A force of nature like a storm or a sunrise that can alter the course of human events? Can a gift from the gods also be a terrible, inescapable burden? The story we delve into tonight is a long and sorrowful meditation on that very question. It is the tale of a beauty so absolute, so divine, that it was not a quality, but an event. It was a beauty that did not simply exist in the world. It acted upon it, like a powerful gravitational pull, bending the wills of men and the fates of nations towards its radiant and ultimately tragic center. We have all heard the phrase, a whisper through the corridors of time, of the face that launched 1,000 ships. We speak it lightly as a metaphor for a great and captivating beauty, but tonight we will journey back to the mythic age where that phrase was not a metaphor, but a literal, devastating truth. We will seek the woman who wore that face. But to understand her story, we must first set aside the roles she was given by others. We must look past the simple labels of the adulteress, the prize, the cause of a war. These were the masks placed upon her by the kings, the heroes, and the poets who sought to explain the madness that she inspired. They sought a reason for the chaos, and the easiest reason was to blame the beautiful object at its center. But she was never truly the agent of her own story. She was the catalyst. She was the golden apple, tossed into the world by the careless hands of the gods, for which men would fight and die. She was the still, silent heart of the hurricane, a point of impossible beauty and grace around which a maelstrom of pride, desire, and destruction would rage for 10 long years. She was the justification, the woman herself, a soul trapped within a form of divine perfection, a prisoner of her own flawless face. We will not tell her story as a history of battles and heroes. We will tell it as an intimate tragedy, the story of a life lived in the possessive gaze of others. We will explore the suffocating weight of being the most beautiful woman in the world, of being desired by all but perhaps truly seen by none. We will try to understand the heart of a woman who was born a princess, became a queen twice over, and yet may never have known a single moment of true freedom. Her journey is a quiet and heartbreaking one. It is a story that asks us to consider whether she was a willing participant in her own fate, or merely a pawn in a grand cosmic game played by the gods, her beauty the most valuable and dangerous piece on the board. We will stand with her on the high walls of Troy and feel the weight of 1,000 accusing eyes as she watches men slaughter each other for the right to possess her. We will be with her in the terrifying silence on the night her city burns, wondering if she will be seen as a victim to be rescued or a traitor to be punished. To understand Helen, we must begin at her strange and otherworldly origin. Her story does not begin with the cry of a mortal baby in a royal nursery. It begins with a myth, with a secret, with a divine deception, and with the impossible, delicate cracking of a shell. For the woman who would bring the age of heroes to its knees was born of an embrace between a queen and a god disguised as a swan. So let your mind grow still, let go of judgment, and open your heart to a story of profound and terrible beauty. Let us find the woman lost inside the legend, the soul hidden behind the face that destroyed a civilization. The story of Helen does not begin in the way of mortals. It does not start with a simple cry, but with a myth whispered in the halls of kings. a tale of divine intervention and a birth so strange it forever marked her as a child of two worlds. Her origin is not rooted in the solid earth of a kingdom, but in a strange and beautiful union of the sky and the water. Her mother was Leda, the beautiful and virtuous queen of Sparta, wife of the noble king Tyndareus. One warm, sunlit afternoon, Leda went down to the banks of the river Eurytas to bathe. The water was cool and clear, the air filled with the gentle hum of insects and the scent of wild flowers. It was a scene of perfect, pastoral peace. From the peak of Olympus, Zeus, the king of the gods, looked down and was utterly captivated by Leda's grace and beauty. A powerful desire took hold of him, but he knew that a mortal queen, especially one as virtuous as Leda, would not be swayed by a grand display of divine power. As he had done before, he chose a path of clever and beautiful deception. He did not descend as a shower of gold or a fearsome bull. He transformed himself into one of the most elegant and majestic of all creatures. He became a great, magnificent swan. Its feathers are brilliant, dazzling white, its long neck curved in a graceful arc, its eyes holding a divine intelligence. To complete his ruse, he commanded Aphrodite, the goddess of love, to assist him. She transformed herself into a fierce eagle and began to theatrically pursue the swan across the sky. Leda, resting by the riverbank, looked up to see this dramatic chase. The great, beautiful swan, appearing to be terrified and desperate, flew down from the sky and sought refuge in her arms, hiding its head in the folds of her robes. Leda, her heart moved with compassion for the beautiful, frightened creature, held it close, stroking its soft feathers and shielding it from the predatory eagle circling above. And in that moment of gentle, protective embrace, the divine will of Zeus was done. The consequences of that strange and fateful afternoon were stranger still. In time, Queen Leda laid 2 eggs. It was from these eggs that her children were born, a mix of the divine and the mortal. From one egg hatched the mortal twins, Castor and Clytemnestra, the true children of her husband, King Tyndareus. They were destined for lives of fame and tragedy, their fates woven into the great sagas of their age. But from the other egg, the one that held the seed of the Sky King, 2 other children emerged. First came Polydeuces, known to the Romans as Pollux, a demigod who shared his father's immortal spirit. He and his mortal twin, Castor, would become the inseparable Dioscuri, their brotherly love so great that they would one day be placed in the heavens as the constellation Gemini. And then, from that same egg, emerged his twin sister. She was not a creature of scales or of feathers. She was a child of impossible, breathtaking beauty. This was Helen. Her birth from an egg was a sign, a powerful and undeniable mark of her unique nature. She was not born of the sweat and pain of a human birth. She emerged into the world as if from a perfect self-contained jewel. It set her apart from all others, even from her own siblings. She was Leda's daughter, yes, but she was also a child of the sky, a daughter of the swan, a direct offspring of the most powerful god in all of creation. Her beauty, from the very first moment, was otherworldly. It was not the simple, rosy prettiness of a human infant. It was a kind of luminous perfection, a harmony of features so absolute that it seemed less a product of nature and more a work of divine art. Her hair shone with the light of her father's heavens, and her eyes, even in infancy, held a strange, captivating depth, a reflection of the mythic and unknowable world from which she had come. This strange birth was both her glory and her curse. It infused her with a divine allure that no mortal could resist, but it also disconnected her from the simple, grounded world of humanity. She was a creature of myth living in a world of men. She was a swan among sparrows, a demi-goddess in a mortal court. Her story could never be an ordinary one. Her fate was not her own to weave. It was a thread spun by the gods on the day of her conception, a destiny as strange, as beautiful, and as fragile as the egg from which she was born. She was, from her very first breath, a prize, a symbol, a being destined to be desired, to be fought over, and to live at the very center of a storm she did not create. The daughter of the swan was born into a world that would never truly understand her, a world that would ultimately be broken by the impossible weight of her divine beauty. The strange and beautiful child of the egg grew within the royal court of Sparta, and as she grew, so too did her otherworldly beauty. It was not a slow and gentle blossoming, but a radiant, almost aggressive unfolding, like a star igniting in the heavens. With each passing year, the divine heritage from her father, Zeus, became more and more apparent, setting her apart not just from other children, but from all mortals. This was not a blessing. From the very beginning, it was a profound and heavy burden. Her beauty was not something that brought her simple joy or easy friendships. It was a phenomenon, a force of nature that disrupted the natural order of things around her. When she walked through the palace gardens, the guards would stop their patrols, their mouths agape, their duties forgotten. When she entered a room, conversations would cease, replaced by a sudden, reverent, and deeply uncomfortable silence. She was not a person to be spoken to, but a spectacle to be gazed upon. Her own siblings, born of the same mother, looked at her with a mixture of love and a strange, distant awe. They could play with each other, argue, and share the simple, messy realities of childhood. But Helen was different. She was treated with a delicate, fragile reverence, as if she were a priceless statue that might break at the slightest touch. She was surrounded by people, but she was utterly, profoundly alone, isolated by the very perfection of her own face. Her fame, even as a young girl, spread far beyond the borders of Sparta. Traders and travelers carried tales of the princess born of a swan, whose beauty was not of the mortal world. They spoke of hair like spun gold, of skin like polished ivory, of a grace that could make a hardened warrior weep. These were not exaggerations, they were simple, inadequate attempts to describe a divine reality, and where tales of such beauty travel, the attention of powerful and ambitious men is sure to follow. She was not yet a woman, barely a girl, but already kings and princes from distant lands began to think of her. They saw her not as a child, but as the ultimate prize, the most valuable treasure in all of Greece. Her beauty was not a gift to be cherished, it was an asset to be possessed. This terrible truth was brought home to her in the most brutal and terrifying way. There lived in Athens a great and famous hero, Theseus. He was the king who had slain the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Crete, a man of immense strength, fame, and a powerful, arrogant ego. He was now growing older, and he and his closest friend decided that they were worthy of marrying daughters of Zeus himself. Having heard the whispers of the impossibly beautiful child in Sparta, Theseus decided that he would have her. He did not send an envoy to ask for her hand. He did not wait for her to become a woman. He, the great hero of Athens, traveled to Sparta, and with a swift and violent purpose, he abducted the young princess. One moment, she was a child in her father's court, and the next she was a captive, stolen away from her home, her family, and everything she had ever known. It was her first, brutal lesson in what her face meant to the world. It meant she was not a person with her own will. It meant she was an object, a prize to be taken by any man strong enough to seize her. She was carried away to a fortress outside of Athens, a terrified child in the hands of a powerful king, her fate hanging by a thread. But Helen was not without protectors. Her twin brothers, Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri, were themselves formidable young heroes. When they learned of their sister's abduction, they were consumed by a righteous fury. They raised an army and marched on Athens, their love for their sister a powerful driving force. They laid waste to the lands around the city, their message clear: return the princess, or all of Attica would burn. Theseus, away on another journey to the underworld, was not there to defend his prize. His people, terrified of the Spartan army, revealed where Helen was hidden. Her brothers stormed the fortress and rescued her, taking her back to the safety of Sparta. But the safety she had once known was gone forever. The world had shown her its true face. Her own beauty was a magnet for obsession and violence. She had learned that her life would be a constant struggle to defend herself against the desires she inspired. This first abduction was a dark and terrible shadow, a chilling prelude to the greater tragedy that was already gathering on the horizon. It was the first tremor of the great earthquake to come, the first note in a sorrowful song that would end with the burning of a great city. Helen, the daughter of the swan, now knew her fate to be the most beautiful, the most desired, and the most tragically hunted woman in all the world. The years passed. The terrified young girl who had been abducted by Theseus blossomed into a woman of such breathtaking, impossible beauty that the stories of her youth seemed like pale shadows. The time had come for her to be married, and this was not a simple family matter. It was a political event of the highest and most dangerous order. News of her eligibility spread like a wildfire across the Greek world. From every corner of the land, the greatest kings, princes, and heroes of the age set aside their duties and their rivalries and made the long journey to the court of Sparta. They came not just as suitors, but as delegates of power, each one representing a mighty kingdom. There was the cunning Odysseus of Ithaca, the mighty Ajax, the noble Diomedes, Menelaus of Mycenae, and dozens of others. The court of King Tyndareus, Helen's earthly father, was soon overflowing with the most powerful and ambitious men in all of Greece. They arrived with extravagant gifts, with grand retinues, and with hearts filled with a fierce, competitive desire. Each man believed that he alone was worthy of winning the hand of the most beautiful woman in the world. King Tyndareus found himself in an impossible and perilous position. He was an old and wise king, and he understood the situation perfectly. These were not lovesick boys. They were proud, powerful, and easily offended rulers. If he were to choose one of them to be his son-in-law, he would simultaneously make enemies of all the others. The rejected suitors, their pride wounded, could easily form an alliance and wage a devastating war against him and the chosen husband. The very beauty that was meant to be his kingdom's greatest asset had become its greatest threat. The tension in the court grew thicker with each passing day. The suitors eyed each other with suspicion and jealousy, their competitive boasts verging on open threats. The king delayed his decision, his mind clouded with a deep and heavy anxiety, for he could see no path that did not lead to bloodshed. It was in this moment of crisis that one of the suitors, the clever and pragmatic Odysseus, came to the king in secret. Odysseus was a realist. He knew, perhaps, that his own small, rocky kingdom of Ithaca could not compete with the wealth of the greater kings. He spoke to Tyndareus with a quiet, strategic brilliance. "My lord," he said, "I can show you a way to solve this problem, a way to prevent a war. But in return, you must promise to help me win the hand of your niece, the steadfast and intelligent Penelope." The king, desperate for any solution, readily agreed. And so, Odysseus laid out his ingenious plan. He told the king to make no choice himself. Instead, before the decision was made, Tyndareus should demand a great and solemn oath from every single suitor. Each man, he proposed, must swear a sacred vow that they would all accept and honor the final choice of who would be Helen's husband. And, more importantly, they must all swear to band together, to unite their armies, and to defend the chosen husband against anyone who might try to challenge the marriage or carry Helen away in the future. It was a stroke of political genius. The plan turned the suitors' own rivalry against them. By taking the oath, each man was binding himself to protect the very man who might become his most hated rival. But because each suitor still believed that he would be the one chosen, they all saw the oath as a form of insurance for their own future happiness. It would guarantee them the collective military might of all of Greece to protect their prize. And so, King Tyndareus gathered the assembled kings and princes. He sacrificed a horse, a sacred and binding act, and had each suitor stand upon its pieces and swear the great and terrible oath. One by one, the most powerful men in the world raised their right hands and vowed to protect Helen's marriage, no matter who her husband might be. A great sense of relief washed over the court. The immediate threat of war had been averted. The king now had the freedom to choose, his decision protected by the most sacred of promises. After careful consideration, the choice was made. The hand of Helen was given to Menelaus, the wealthy and powerful prince of Mycenae and brother to the high king, Agamemnon. The other suitors, bound by their sacred vow, honored the decision. They offered their congratulations, packed their gifts, and returned to their own kingdoms, leaving Sparta in peace. It seemed as though Odysseus's clever plan had worked perfectly. A devastating war had been avoided, and Helen's future seemed, for the first time, secure. But fate has a profound and often tragic sense of irony. The oath, which was designed to protect Helen and to prevent a war, had inadvertently become the very mechanism that would later guarantee one. It had created a formal, legally binding military alliance, a sleeping giant, with the marriage of Helen at its very heart. All it would take was a single act of transgression against that marriage, a single abduction, to awaken that giant and to call every king who had sworn the oath to arms. The clever solution to a small problem had laid the perfect, legalistic foundation for the greatest and most terrible war the world had ever known. The seed of the Trojan War was not planted on the day Helen was stolen, but on the day these proud men swore a solemn oath to keep her safe. And so, the great contest for Helen's hand was concluded. The ambitious kings and princes returned to their lands, and a fragile peace settled over Greece. Helen, the divine daughter of Zeus, was now Helen of Sparta, wife to King Menelaus. By all outward appearances, she had arrived at the pinnacle of mortal fortune. Her life was one of unimaginable luxury. The palace of Sparta was a fortress of wealth and power, its halls filled with treasures from across the known world. She was draped in the finest silks and the most brilliant jewels. Servants attended to her every need, and poets sang songs in praise of her legendary beauty. She was the queen of one of the most powerful kingdoms in Greece, wife to a king who, in his own way, adored her. He saw her not just as a wife, but as the ultimate symbol of his own success and status, the most precious treasure in his entire kingdom. And she was a good queen. She performed her duties with a quiet, distant grace. She managed the grand household, she entertained foreign dignitaries, and she sat beside her husband in the great hall, a vision of regal perfection. She also became a mother, giving birth to a daughter, a beautiful child named Hermione, who became the one true, uncomplicated source of joy in her life. For a few short years, the storm that had haunted her youth seemed to have passed. There were no more abductions, no more rivalries that threatened to tear the world apart for her sake. There was only the steady, predictable, and peaceful rhythm of life in the Spartan court. But peace, for Helen, was a strange and hollow thing. Her life was a beautiful, meticulously crafted, and utterly inescapable cage. She was admired by all, but truly known by none. To her husband, she was a possession, a divine jewel to be guarded and displayed. To her people, she was a distant, goddess-like figure, a symbol of the kingdom's pride, not a woman of flesh and blood with her own thoughts and her own quiet sorrows. The very beauty that had won her this kingdom also served as an invisible wall, isolating her from the simple, genuine human connection she may have craved. Imagine her in those quiet moments after the formal dinners were over and the songs of the poets had faded. See her standing alone on a palace balcony, looking up at a sky full of stars that seemed so much freer than she. Did she feel fulfilled? Did she feel loved, or merely owned? Did her heart, the heart of a demi-goddess born for a life of epic significance, ever feel a quiet sense of disappointment in this safe, predictable, and passionless existence? Her days were a long, beautiful, and unbroken routine. She was surrounded by beauty, but it was a cold, formal beauty of polished marble and precious metals. Her only duty was to be beautiful, to be graceful, and to be the perfect silent symbol of her husband's kingdom. It was a life of profound and quiet loneliness. She was the most beautiful woman in the world, living in a gilded cage, her own inner world a mystery to everyone around her. She was a swan in a pen of domestic geese, her wings clipped, a divine nature confined to a small, earthly, and ultimately unsatisfying role. This was the quiet, fragile peace that preceded the great storm. It was a life of silent yearning, a beautiful but empty stage, waiting for a new actor to arrive and disrupt the scene. The world thought she was finally safe, protected by the might of her husband and the great oath of all the Greek kings. But the fates and the gods were not yet finished with Helen of Troy. The choice of a young shepherd prince on a distant mountain, a choice made years before, was already sending ripples across the sea of destiny. An emissary of Aphrodite, a man who had been promised the most beautiful woman in the world as his prize, was about to set sail for Sparta. He was not coming to conquer a kingdom, he was not coming to challenge a king to battle, he was coming for the prize he had been promised. He was coming for her, and his arrival would shatter the fragile peace of Helen's gilded cage forever, plunging her and the entire world into a decade of fire, of sorrow, and of a terrible, tragic glory. While Helen lived out her quiet, gilded days in the palace of Sparta, a world away, on a windswept and lonely mountain called Ida, a single, fleeting event was unfolding that would seal her destiny forever. She did not know it, she could not feel it, but the three most powerful goddesses in the universe had gathered, and the subject of their divine and jealous argument was about to become inextricably entwined with her own life. The story, as we have heard in other tales, began with a golden apple, thrown by the goddess of discord, bearing the inscription, "For the fairest." It was a seed of chaos, a perfect and simple catalyst for a conflict of cosmic proportions. And the three goddesses who claimed it, the majestic Queen Hera, the wise warrior Athena, and the irresistible Aphrodite, had brought their dispute to be judged by a mortal. He was not, at that time, known as a great prince. He was a young man named Paris, living the simple life of a shepherd on the slopes of Mount Ida, unaware that he was the lost son of the king of Troy. He was chosen for his renowned fairness and his innocent, uncorrupted appreciation of beauty. A young shepherd, resting in the shade of a pine tree, is suddenly confronted by a vision of impossible, terrifying splendor. Three beings of pure, divine light stand before him, their beauty and power so overwhelming that he can barely meet their gaze. Hermes, the messenger god, presents him with the gleaming golden apple, and explains his impossible task. He must choose which of these goddesses is the most beautiful. It was not a fair contest. It was a test of a young man's soul, a choice between the fundamental powers that govern the world, and the goddesses, in their vanity and their ambition, did not rely on their beauty alone. They offered him bribes, each one a promise of a different kind of life, a different kind of power. Hera, the queen of the heavens, her voice resonating with the authority of 1,000 kings, offered him empire. She promised to make him the ruler of all the lands of Asia, to give him wealth and power beyond the dreams of any mortal. It was an offer of worldly dominion. Then came Athena, her grey eyes shining with the cool light of intellect. She offered him glory, she promised him victory in every battle, wisdom in every council, and a heroic fame that would echo through the ages. It was an offer of immortal renown. And last came Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She did not offer him armies or empires or songs of glory. She approached him with a gentle smile, her presence a warm and intoxicating perfume on the mountain air. She leaned in and whispered a promise that was simple, personal, and aimed directly at the heart of the young, passionate prince. She promised him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman in all the world. She did not name Helen. To Aphrodite, Helen was not a person, not a queen, not a wife and a mother. She was a concept. She was the embodiment of perfect mortal beauty, and therefore, she was a prize to be offered, a token to be exchanged in the goddess's grand game. Paris, a young man who had known only the simple life of a shepherd, was not tempted by the vast, abstract promises of empire or the grim glories of war. His heart was moved by the immediate, tangible promise of a perfect love. He looked at the three goddesses, and without hesitation, he extended the golden apple to Aphrodite. The decision was made. A universe away, Helen, who was perhaps at that very moment overseeing her household in Sparta or telling a story to her young daughter, felt nothing. The air did not tremble. No omen appeared in the sky. But in that moment, the entire course of her life was irrevocably altered. Her fate, which had seemed so settled, was now unwritten and rewritten by the choice of a stranger on a lonely hill. Station. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, now owed a great and powerful favor to a Trojan prince, and Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, was the currency with which that debt would be paid. The two goddesses who had been scorned, Hera and Athena, turned away, their hearts filled with a cold and eternal rage. Their anger was not just for the young prince who had insulted them, it was for his entire city, his entire people. In that moment, they swore a silent, unbreakable oath that Troy, the home of the Prince Paris, would one day be turned to dust and ashes. And so, all the pieces were set upon the board for the great and terrible game to come. A vengeful goddess had a prize to deliver. Two other vengeful goddesses had a city to destroy. A great oath sworn by 100 Greek kings lay dormant, waiting to be triggered. And at the very center of this looming, catastrophic storm was Helen, the queen of Sparta, utterly oblivious. She was a beautiful, lonely queen, living in a gilded cage, unaware that the walls of her cage were about to be shattered and that her face, a face she had not chosen, was about to become the most famous and the most cursed in all of human history. The choice made on Mount Ida did not remain a secret for long. Paris, the shepherd, was soon revealed to be the lost prince of Troy and was welcomed back into the grand palace of his father, King Priam. But he carried with him a secret and powerful promise, a divine debt waiting to be collected. And it was not long before Aphrodite, the goddess of love, began to weave the threads of fate to fulfill her part of the bargain. She guided Paris to build a great ship, and she filled his heart with an unshakable resolve to sail across the Aegean Sea to the formidable kingdom of Sparta. He traveled not as a warrior, but as a diplomat on a mission of peace, a royal guest to be welcomed in the court of King Menelaus. When Paris and his retinue arrived at the palace, they were greeted with all the honor and hospitality that the sacred laws of guest friendship, the Xenia, demanded. Menelaus, a good and trusting king, welcomed the handsome Trojan prince into his home, throwing a great feast in his honor. And it was there, in the great, torchlit hall of the Spartan palace, that Paris first laid eyes upon Helen. If the stories had prepared him for her beauty, the reality of it still struck him like a physical blow. She was more than the tales had described. She was not just a beautiful woman, she was a presence, a luminous being who seemed to radiate a soft golden light. When she entered the room, it was as if all other sounds and sights faded into a muted background. To look upon her was to feel a sudden, sharp ache in the heart, a profound and overwhelming sense of longing, and Helen, in turn, looked upon the young prince of Troy. She saw his youthful, startling beauty, so different from her own stern, war-hardened husband. She saw in his eyes a gentleness and a passion that was a world away from the cold, formal admiration she was used to. But it was more than that. Something else was at work in that hall, a power far older and more potent than simple human attraction. Aphrodite, seeing her chosen champion in the presence of his promised prize, began her subtle, magical work. She was in the air, in the flickering torchlight, in the sweet wine that they drank. She was a whisper in their minds, an enchantment upon their hearts. The goddess began to unravel the threads of Helen's loyalty, not with force, but with a gentle, irresistible persuasion. She awakened in Helen's lonely heart all the dormant yearnings for a life she had never known, a life of passion, of romance, of being seen not as a queen, but as a woman. She made Paris seem not just a handsome prince, but the very embodiment of that dream, the one soul in all the universe who could finally free her from her gilded cage. It was not a rational decision. It was an enchantment, a divine spell woven into the very fabric of her emotions. Her duty, her daughter, her kingdom, all the anchors of her life began to feel distant and insubstantial, like a half-remembered dream. All that felt real was the overwhelming, magnetic pull towards the Trojan prince. Fate then conspired to complete the goddess's design. King Menelaus was called away to Crete to attend a funeral, leaving his royal guest in the care of his queen. It was a fatal mistake, a moment of perfect opportunity that the goddess and the prince would not let pass. The final moments in Sparta are shrouded in myth and conflicting tales. Some say that Paris, his heart emboldened by the goddess's magic, seized Helen and a vast portion of the palace's treasure and fled in the night, a brutal and straightforward abduction. But other, quieter stories tell a different tale. They speak of a Helen who was not dragged away in chains, but who walked as if in a trance, her own will clouded by a divine fog. They say she willingly followed Paris to his ship, leaving behind her home, her husband, and even her beloved 9-year-old daughter, Hermione. It was an act so contrary to the duties of a queen and a mother that it can almost only be understood as the result of a mind not entirely her own. Whether by force or by enchantment, the result was the same. As the Trojan ship slipped away from the Spartan shore under the cover of darkness, it carried with it the Queen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in the world. The sacred laws of hospitality had been shattered, the wife of a great king had been stolen, and the great, terrible oath that had been sworn by 100 Greek kings so many years before, the oath that had lain dormant for so long, was now triggered. A single, invisible threat had been snapped, and in that moment, the sleeping giant of the Achaean armies began to stir. Helen was now on a journey across the sea, away from her old life and towards a new and terrible destiny. She was caught in the irresistible current of Aphrodite's promise, a pawn being moved across the board in a divine game. She was on her way to Troy, a city she would come to know as both the golden prison and the stage for the greatest tragedy the world had ever known. The journey across the Aegean was a dream, a blur of salt spray and starry nights. When Helen finally stepped ashore, it was into a world unlike any she had ever known. This was Troy, the great city of King Priam, the jewel of Asia Minor. It was a city of legendary wealth and power, its magnificent, impenetrable walls said to have been built by the gods themselves. She was brought into the palace not as a captive in chains, but with all the honor due to a visiting queen. She was presented to the royal family, to the wise and gentle King Priam, the noble Queen Hecuba, and the great Trojan heroes, including the mighty and honorable Hector, Paris's elder brother. They looked upon her with a mixture of profound awe and deep, unspoken dread. They saw at once that the stories were true. Her beauty was a force of nature, a divine and startling light in their mortal halls. But they also saw the shadow that she cast, the terrible danger she had brought with her to their gates. They knew that a king's hospitality had been violated, that a great oath had been broken, and that the vengeful fleets of Greece would not be far behind. And so began Helen's strange and lonely life within the Golden City. Her position was a paradox, an impossible contradiction. Was she a beloved new princess, the chosen bride of Paris? Or was she a stolen prize, a royal captive, the most beautiful and dangerous prisoner of war in all of history? She was, in truth, both and neither. Paris adored her with a desperate, possessive passion. He showered her with gifts, with silks, and with jewels, and saw her as the ultimate validation of his own worth, the prize he had won from the gods. But his love was the love of a collector for his most prized possession, not the love of a man for an equal partner. To the royal family, she was a source of constant anxiety. But he knew, with the grim foresight of a great warrior, that she was the doom of his beloved city. He treated her with a cool, formal courtesy, but there was always a distance, a chasm of unspoken tragedy between them. And to the common people of Troy, she was a figure of immense fascination and growing resentment. They would whisper and stare as she passed, marveling at her divine beauty. But as the months turned into years, and the threatening sails of the Greek fleet appeared on the horizon, their awe began to curdle into blame. She was the beautiful evil, the foreign woman whose face had brought an army of vengeful warriors to their shores. She could feel their accusing glances in the streets, hear their bitter whispers in the marketplace. Her life was one of supreme, luxurious isolation. She lived in the finest chambers of the palace, surrounded by every comfort. She had handmaidens to attend to her, and she spent her days at her loom, weaving the stories of the growing war, her own tragic tale being captured in the threads. But she had no true friends, no confidantes. She was a stranger in a strange land, a queen with no kingdom, a wife whose husband had started a war for her, but who could not protect her from the hatred of his own people. Her deepest moments of connection were, ironically, with the old king, Priam. He, unlike so many others, did not see her as a curse. He saw her as a victim of the gods' cruel games, a fellow soul caught in the unforgiving gears of fate. He would often sit with her on the high walls of the city, and with a gentle, fatherly kindness, he would ask her to point out the great Greek heroes in the camps below: the mighty Agamemnon, the clever Odysseus, the swift Achilles. Imagine those moments. Helen, the queen of Sparta, standing on the walls of her captor's city, looking down upon the army of her former husband, identifying the very men who had once sworn to protect her, who were now fighting and dying to reclaim her. The weight of the tragedy, the sheer, crushing irony of her position must have been almost unbearable. She was the silent, beautiful reason for all this death, this destruction, a face that had indeed launched 1,000 ships and brought them crashing down upon the shores of this golden, doomed city. She was a queen in a golden cage, just as she had been in Sparta. But this cage was different. Its bars were not made of courtly protocol, but of the unbreakable walls of a city under siege. And outside those walls, an entire world was being torn apart, all for the right to possess the beautiful, sorrowful woman who could do nothing but watch. Her existence became a quiet, sorrowful vigil. She was the war's silent center, a queen of a phantom kingdom, her only role to be the beautiful, tragic reason for it all. Each morning, she would awaken to the distant sounds of battle, the clash of bronze, the shouts of men, the terrible cries of the wounded and the dying. And each evening, she would watch from the high walls as the bodies were gathered, the funeral pyres lit, their smoke rising to the heavens like a sorrowful prayer. Every death, whether Greek or Trojan, felt like a stone being placed upon her own heart. She knew their names. She knew their families. From her long, sad conversations with King Priam on the ramparts, she had come to know the faces of the Greek heroes who had once been her countrymen. She watched Achilles, the swift and glorious demigod, rage across the battlefield like a force of nature. She saw the mighty Ajax, a tower of strength, holding the line against impossible odds. She recognized the clever Odysseus, his mind always working, his strategies turning the tide of battle. These were the men who had once sought her hand, who had sworn to protect her, now dying in the dust to possess her. And she had come to know the Trojan heroes as well. She saw the nobility and the courage of the great Hector, who fought not for glory, but for the love of his city, his wife, and his infant son. She saw his quiet, weary strength as he left for battle each day, knowing he was fighting a war his brother had started, a war he did not believe they could win. When she watched him fall at the hands of Achilles, a part of Troy's soul died with him, and a part of Helen's too. She was trapped in a waking nightmare, haunted by the faces of the dead. In her dreams, she would hear the voices of the women of Troy, weeping for the husbands and sons who would not return from the battlefield. She was their queen in name, but in their hearts, she was the cause of their endless grief. Her beauty, once a source of divine pride, now felt like a grotesque and terrible mask she could not remove. What good was a perfect face when it only served as a banner for death? She would look at her own reflection in a polished mirror and see not a queen, but a curse, a beautiful vessel for sorrow. She would often wish that she had never been born, or that she had been born plain and unnoticed, free to live a simple, anonymous life. She was consumed by a profound and inescapable sense of guilt, yet also by a feeling of utter powerlessness. She had not asked for this. She had not chosen this. She was a single, solitary woman, caught between the pride of kings, the ambitions of heroes, and the cruel, indifferent whims of the gods. Aphrodite, the goddess who had started it all, was a distant, silent presence. She saw him not as a romantic hero, but as a weak and beautiful man who was all too willing to let his brother and his countrymen die for his own selfish prize. The passion had faded, replaced by a quiet contempt and a deep, abiding shame. And so she spent her days weaving. At her loom, she poured out all her silent grief, her guilt, and her despair. She wove the story of the war, her threads capturing the heroic charges, the brutal duels, the moments of courage and of tragedy. It was the only way she could make sense of the chaos, the only way she could bear witness to the suffering that was being enacted in her name. Her tapestry was a silent, sorrowful confession, a beautiful and heartbreaking record of a world being destroyed for the sake of a shadow, the shadow of a woman who was standing on the walls watching it all burn. After 10 long years of brutal and inconclusive warfare, a strange and sudden stillness fell over the plains of Troy. The vast Greek army, which had been a constant, menacing presence for a decade, was gone. Their camp was deserted, its tents struck, its fires cold. All that remained on the empty, windswept beach was a single, bizarre and colossal offering, a great and magnificent horse, fashioned from the planks of their own ships, standing silent and imposing under the morning sun. A wave of delirious joy swept through the city of Troy. The war was over. The enemy had fled. They had won. The people poured out of the gates, cheering and marveling at the strange wooden beast left behind. It was, they believed, a sacred offering to the gods, a tribute left by the defeated Greeks to ensure their safe passage home. But in the high chambers of the palace, Helen felt no joy. She looked out upon the strange, silent horse, and her heart, long accustomed to the rhythms of war and the strategies of clever men, was filled not with relief, but with a cold and heavy dread. Her beauty had given her a life among heroes, and she had learned to recognize the scent of a hero's trick. She knew the mind of Odysseus, the master of cunning, and this silent wooden gift felt like his signature. Cassandra. They attached ropes to the great horse, and, with immense effort and celebration, they dragged their own doom through the gates and into the heart of their city. That night, Troy celebrated. The city, which had known only the grim discipline of war for a decade, gave itself over to feasting, to wine, and to a joyous, exhausted relief. But Helen did not celebrate. As the city fell into a drunken, unsuspecting slumber, she was consumed by a terrible and conflicting turmoil. She knew what was hidden inside that wooden shell, and she was now faced with an impossible choice, a final, terrible test of her allegiance. Was she Helen of Sparta or Helen of Troy? Was her loyalty to the city that had been her home and her prison for 10 years, or to the men who had come across the sea to reclaim her? Her own survival, she knew, depended entirely on the choice she was about to make. The myths of that night are dark, whispered, and contradictory. One story, and there she lit a single, bright torch, a prearranged signal to the Greek fleet, which was hiding just beyond the horizon, that the horse was safely inside the walls. In this tale, she chose her old life, betraying the city that had sheltered her in order to ensure her own rescue and survival. But another, more tragic tale is told. In this version, her heart was torn. She felt a deep pity for the Trojans, for the gentle King Priam, for the noble Hector who had died, for the women and children who were about to suffer a terrible fate, led by her conflicted heart. She is said to have crept out into the silent city square and circled the great wooden horse, and here she performed a strange and unsettling act. She began to call out to the Greek heroes hidden within, but she did it by perfectly mimicking the voices of their wives, whom they had not heard in 10 long years. "Odysseus, my love, is that you?" she might have whispered, her voice a perfect echo of Penelope's. "Diomedes, my husband, have you come for me?" It was a test, a cruel and brilliant temptation. She was trying to trick them into revealing themselves, perhaps to save the city, or perhaps just to confirm her own terrible suspicions. Inside the dark, cramped belly of the horse, the heroes stirred, their hearts aching at the sound of their wives' voices. Some were on the verge of calling out, of betraying the entire plan. But Odysseus, the master of self-control, held them back, clamping his hand over a soldier's mouth, hissing at them to remain silent, for he recognized the divine, deceptive magic in her mimicry. Which story is true? Was she a traitor or a temptress, a savior or a saboteur? Perhaps she was simply a desperate woman, caught in an impossible position, making one final, ambiguous move in a game she had never controlled, her actions guided only by the primal instinct to survive. What is certain is what happened next. Under the cover of the deepest night, a small hatch in the horse's belly opened, a rope was lowered, and one by one, the deadliest warriors of the Greek army slipped silently to the ground. They were the city's death, unleashed from within its own triumphant heart. They moved like ghosts through the sleeping streets, killing the sentries and throwing open the great gates of Troy. The waiting Greek army, summoned by a signal, poured into the unsuspecting city, and the night erupted into a storm of fire, of screams, and of the terrible final sounds of a great civilization being erased from the world. The 10-year siege had ended not in a truce, but in a final, brutal massacre. For Helen, high in the royal palace, the sounds were the confirmation of her deepest fears. The doom she had lived with as a shadow for a decade had finally become a terrifying, physical reality. The city that had been her golden cage was now a raging inferno, and its walls, once a symbol of her captivity, were now the only thing standing between her and the vengeful fury of the Greek army. She was in a position of unimaginable peril. To the Trojans who were being slaughtered in the streets, she was the cause of their ruin, a foreign curse who had brought this doom upon them. To the invading Greeks, she was the stolen prize, yes, but she was also the adulterous queen for whom they had sacrificed a generation of heroes. Her life could be taken by either side in the chaos by a Trojan seeking revenge, or by a Greek soldier who saw her as the symbol of his own long suffering. Her first instinct was one of pure primal survival. Guided by the goddess Aphrodite, who had not yet abandoned her prize, she sought out the Trojan prince, Deiphobus, another of Priam's sons, whom she had been married to after the death of Paris. But this was not a move of loyalty, it was a move of desperation, seeking the protection of any powerful figure in the heart of the chaos. But the palace itself was no longer a sanctuary. Its magnificent halls, once filled with music and poetry, now echoed with the sounds of battle and the screams of the dying. The Greek heroes, their faces grim and smeared with soot, stormed through the corridors, their swords showing no mercy. Helen watched this all, a silent, terrified ghost in the midst of the carnage. She was a queen watching her second kingdom crumble into dust, just as her first had been torn apart by her departure. Everywhere she looked, the world was ending. And then, through the smoke and the chaos, she saw him. And in his hand, he held a bronze sword, its sharp edge gleaming in the firelight. He had fought for 10 long years for this moment, the moment he would finally reclaim his stolen honor by taking the life of his unfaithful wife. He saw her across the ruined hall, and their eyes met for the first time in a decade across a gulf of war, of death, and of profound betrayal. He began to advance towards her, his sword raised, his purpose clear and terrible in his eyes. The Greek soldiers around him stopped their looting, falling silent to watch the final personal climax of this epic war. This was not about a kingdom anymore. She knew there was nowhere to run. In that moment, as her abandoned husband came to kill her, she did the only thing she could. It was not a plea, nor was it an act of defiance. It was a simple, involuntary gesture of profound and sorrowful surrender. She let the torn and smoke-stained robes she had been clutching fall from her shoulders. It was a final, desperate act of vulnerability, revealing the same divine, ageless, and impossible beauty that had started it all. She stood before him, bathed in the terrible, flickering light of the burning city, her face a masterpiece of tragic perfection, her eyes filled not with fear, but with a deep and weary sorrow. And Menelaus, the vengeful king, the furious warrior, stopped in his tracks. Time itself seemed to hold its breath in the ruined, firelit hall. The world, which moments before had been a symphony of chaos and destruction, narrowed to this single silent space between a husband and a wife, separated by a decade of war. Menelaus stood frozen, his powerful arm, which had just cut a bloody path through the heart of Troy, held motionless in the air. His sword, raised to deliver the final, avenging blow, seemed suddenly impossibly heavy. His mind, which had been a storm of righteous fury for 10 long years, a mind that had rehearsed this single moment 1,000 times, went utterly, profoundly still, was looking at Helen. He was not looking at the symbol of his shame, not the treacherous adulteress, not the cause of a generation of death. In that instant, all of that fell away. He was seeing her, the woman whose beauty had once been the pride of his life, the center of his world, and she was more beautiful than he remembered. The years of sorrow and of siege had not diminished her. They had deepened her beauty, stripping it of its youthful innocence and replacing it with a profound, tragic, and heartbreaking majesty. It was the very essence of Aphrodite's power, a final, unanswerable argument. What is a decade of war in the face of such a thing? What is a king's wounded pride when confronted with a living piece of divinity, the anger in his heart, the rage that had been his constant companion for a third of his life, did not fight and lose. It simply dissolved. It evaporated like morning mist in the face of a rising sun. All that was left was a deep, aching, and overwhelming sense of loss, of waste, and of a love that had once been. Slowly, his fingers, which had been clenched around the hilt of his sword, began to loosen. The bronze sword, the instrument of his intended vengeance, slipped from his grasp. It fell to the marble floor with a loud, ringing clatter that echoed through the silent, ruined hall, a sound that seemed to signal the true and final end of the war. He did not speak. He simply stood there, his gaze locked on hers, and in his eyes, the fury was replaced by a look of profound, weary, and sorrowful awe. The Greek soldiers who had been watching, their own hearts filled with a lust for vengeance, saw their king's resolve crumble, and they, too, fell silent. They had come here to destroy the face that had launched 1,000 ships. But now, seeing it, they understood. They understood the madness that had driven the Trojan prince, and they understood the war they had just fought. They were in the presence of something beyond their comprehension, a power greater than any army. Helen did not move. She simply stood there, a silent queen in the ashes of her second kingdom, her beauty her only shield. In that moment, she was neither Spartan nor Trojan. She was simply Helen, a force of nature, her very existence, a power that could calm the hand of a vengeful king and silence the rage of an army. Her beauty had been her curse. It had been the cage that had defined her life, the reason for her abduction, the cause of a catastrophic war. And with a gesture of profound and unexpected tenderness, he draped it over her bare shoulders. It was not an act of a conqueror claiming his prize. It was the act of a husband, a man protecting the woman who was, and had always been, in the shattered and confused center of his own heart. The war was over. Helen had survived. She was going home. The ashes of Troy grew cold. The cries of the fallen faded into the sorrowful whisper of the wind. The surviving Greek heroes, their ships laden with the spoils of a brutal victory, began the long and arduous journey home across a wide, dark sea that seemed to mourn the loss of so many. And among them, on the royal ship of King Menelaus, was Helen. She was not a captive in chains, nor was she a celebrated, rescued queen. She was something in between, a figure of profound and unsettling ambiguity, her very presence a silent testament to the 10 years of bloodshed that had just concluded. The Greek soldiers, men who had lost brothers, fathers, and friends in the war fought for her name, looked upon her with a mixture of awe and simmering resentment. She was the divine prize for which they had sacrificed everything, but she was also the face of their grief. Her journey home with Menelaus was a long and strange one, a 10-year odyssey of its own, as if the gods, not yet finished with their sport, blew their ship far off course. They wandered the seas, visiting strange and distant lands like Cyprus, Phoenicia, and even the mystical, wealthy lands of Egypt. It was a long, slow, and surreal reacquaintance, a decade spent in the strange limbo between the smoking ruins of her second life and the uncertain reality of her first. What was said between them in those long years at sea, no poet has ever truly recorded. What forgiveness was asked for, what blame was cast, what sorrow was shared, it remains a profound and human silence at the heart of the myth. When they finally returned to the palace of Sparta, they were no longer the young king and queen who had been torn apart by fate. They were survivors, their hearts and their kingdom scarred by a war that had shaken the heavens. And it is here that Helen's story splinters, breaking into different, conflicting streams of myth, as if the world itself could not decide what to do with a woman who had carried such an impossible weight. In the most famous version, the one told by the great poet Homer, Helen resumed her place as the queen of Sparta with a strange and sorrowful grace. She and Menelaus ruled together, their life a quiet, elegant tapestry woven over a chasm of unspoken grief. She was a gracious hostess, a dignified queen, but there was a deep and unshakable melancholy about her. She moved through the halls of her palace like a beautiful ghost, her thoughts forever drifting back to the high walls of the city that had burned for her. In this version, she lived out her days in a state of perpetual, queenly penance, forever haunted by the memory of the thousands who had died for her face. But there are other, stranger, and perhaps more telling myths. One tale whispers that the Helen who went to Troy was not real at all. It claims that she was a phantom, an eidolon, a perfect illusion crafted from clouds and light by the gods to fool the Prince Paris. The real Helen, this story says, was whisked away by the gods and spent the entire 10 years of the war in the peaceful, secluded land of Egypt, innocent of all that had happened. Was Marseilles into the Steen Tentikers. In this version, she was a pure and blameless victim of a divine prank, and the entire Trojan War, with all its death and glory, was fought over nothing more than a beautiful ghost. It is a strange and haunting idea, one that absolves Helen of all guilt, but also robs her of all agency, making her even more of a passive object in the gods' cruel game. Another, darker tale follows her after the death of Menelaus. Hated and reviled by the people of Sparta, who still blamed her for the war, she was driven into exile. She sought refuge on the island of Rhodes, ruled by a queen whose own husband had died in the Trojan War. The queen, seeking revenge, had her servants disguise themselves as Furies, the ancient spirits of vengeance. They seized Helen while she was bathing, and, in a final brutal act of retribution for the war she had caused, they hanged her from a tree. In this version, her beauty could not save her in the end, and the hatred she had inspired finally caught up with her. And yet, there is one final, beautiful myth. Two could not truly die a mortal death. Upon her passing, she was transported to the Elysian Fields, the paradise of heroes in the underworld, and there, in that place of eternal peace, she was finally reunited with the greatest hero of the age, Achilles, the very warrior whose death had been a pivotal moment in the war fought for her. And there, far from the world of jealous kings and angry gods, the most beautiful of all women and the greatest of all warriors finally found a lasting peace together. We will never know which of these stories is the truest. Perhaps they are all true in their own way. They show us a life so extraordinary that it could not be contained in a single narrative. What they all share is a sense of profound tragedy. Whether she lived a long life of quiet sorrow, was a phantom all along, met a violent end, or found peace in the afterlife, Helen of Troy never truly escaped the consequences of her own divine beauty. She was a woman who was loved, hated, desired, and blamed, but who may never have been truly understood. And so, the many branching paths of Helen's story all fade into the mists of myth, leaving us here in the quiet of the present to contemplate the shape of the shadow she has cast across time. What, in the end, is the true legacy of Helen of Troy? Her legacy is not in the ruins of a burned city, nor in the glorious poems that sing of the heroes who fought for her. Her true, and most tragic, legacy is the way she was transformed by the world from a woman into an idea. She was a living, breathing soul, with her own hopes, her own fears, and her own desires. But the world, overwhelmed by the power of her beauty, could not see the person. It saw only the symbol. To the Greeks, she became a symbol of their nation's stolen honor, the ultimate justification for a decade of war and sacrifice. She was the beautiful, lost prize that had to be reclaimed at any cost. To the Trojans, she became a symbol of a fatal foreign beauty, a beautiful evil, a divine curse that had been brought into their city, leading to its inevitable doom. To the poets, she became the ultimate muse, a perfect, silent, and beautiful object around which they could weave their epic tales of masculine heroism, of rage, and of glory. She was the still and perfect center of their story, but she was rarely given a voice of her own. And to history, she has become a warning, a cautionary tale about the destructive power of beauty and desire. In all of these roles, the real Helen, the woman who was born of Leda, who loved her own children, who felt the sting of loneliness in a foreign city, was lost. She was flattened, simplified, and polished into a smooth, beautiful, and tragic icon. Her humanity was the price she paid for her immortality in story. Her story teaches us a profound and sorrowful lesson about the way the world treats beauty, especially the beauty of women. It shows us how often a beautiful woman is made a vessel for the desires, the ambitions, and the blames of others. She becomes a mirror in which men see their own hopes for conquest, their own fears of temptations, and their own justifications for violence. The woman herself, the soul behind the face, often becomes invisible. Helen was the ultimate object of the gaze of suitors who saw her as a political prize, the gaze of a prince who saw her as the fulfillment of a divine promise, the gaze of two entire armies who saw her as the living symbol of their conflict. She lived her life on a stage, under a spotlight from which she could never escape, every action and inaction interpreted by a world that had already decided who she was. And so, her legacy is a quiet, haunting question that echoes down to us through the ages. What is the cost of being an icon? What happens to the soul when the face becomes more important than the person? Her tale is a deep and melancholic meditation on the difference between being desired and being loved. To be desired is to be wanted as an object, a prize, a reflection of the desirer's own ego. To be loved is to be seen and known for who you are, with all your flaws and all your complexities. Helen was perhaps the most desired woman in all of history, but we are left to wonder if she was ever truly loved. She is the eternal, beautiful ghost that haunts the pages of history, a reminder of the destructive power of obsession and of the profound tragedy of a woman who was seen by everyone, but understood by almost no one. Her face may have launched 1,000 ships, but her story launches 1,000 questions into the quiet of our own hearts, questions about beauty, blame, and the lonely fate of becoming a legend. The Great War is over. The echoes of heroes have faded. The face that burned a city has finally found its rest in the quiet mists of legend. Let the heavy story fall away. Let the beauty and the sorrow dissolve. There is no judgment here, no blame, only peace. There is only the gentle, quiet rhythm of your own breath, a simple and constant truth. The deep, dreamless sleep that knows no conflict awaits you. Rest now, be at peace, sleep now.